With WWE announcing WrestleMania 36 in Tampa on April 5th, 2020, the thought of Tampa and pro wrestling elicits many fond memories. Tampa has a rich history in pro wrestling, and part of that rich history features one of the all-time greats, Dory Funk Jr. of the famous Funk Wrestling family. Thank you so much, Dory. When I mention Tampa, what does that mean to you?
Oh, wow. It means so much. It means my father in my corner, Dory Funk Sr., World Heavyweight Championship match against a terrific wrestler, Giant Gene Kiniski. It means winning the NWA World Heavyweight Championship and traveling throughout the world, defending the belt and the title. It brings memories of Sam Mushnick, president of the National Wrestling Alliance, and what he did for the wrestling business. It means credibility. It means big business in professional wrestling, large crowds, basically large crowds every night. It means pride in representing the NWA and professional wrestling itself.
Dory, can you talk about, I know there's been so much talent that has gone through the ranks of championship wrestling from Florida. Can you bring up some names, some talent that you just remember in association with CWF?
Well, you know, the first one I'm going to bring up is I've probably wrestled him more times than anybody else, was Jack Brisco. And he represented a lot of things. He represented credibility for the business of professional wrestling. And he also represented the number one challenger for the NWA World Heavyweight Championship when I was champion. He represented a real class act for professional wrestling.
When you think of CWF and the ownership and just what it meant to Florida and what it meant to wrestling in general, how big was championship wrestling from Florida during the territory days?
It was capacity business once a week in each of the major cities, from Tampa to Miami, Jacksonville. It was just Orlando. It was a big capacity business every week, and it was a capacity business, not once in a long period of time for each city. We were going nightly, every wrestler wrestling every night at that time.
Dory, what made championship wrestling from Florida so good, so big, so great?
Eddie Graham. Eddie was a big star in New York. From New York, he traveled to Amarillo, Texas, and he spent a couple of years working the Amarillo territory, and he was very closely associated with my father, Dory Funk Sr. And Eddie Graham used to study what my father did in professional wrestling and watched and learned. He didn't only learn about wrestling, he learned about the promotion and credibility of professional wrestling. And even to the extent, my father was, while he was wrestling, he was superintendent at Texas Boys Ranch. And when Eddie Graham came to Florida, professional wrestling became a sponsor of Florida Sheriff's Boys Ranch. And learned a lot from my father, and he carried it over into the promotion of professional wrestling. And the number one thing he was always looking for was credibility in the athletes that he was selling to the people. And hence, Jack Brisco, Jerry Brisco, Brian Blair, just a lot of very credible athletes in the Florida territory.
Well, you mentioned the Florida Sheriff Boys Ranch, and that's interesting because I didn't know that your father had something like that in Texas as well. How important was that to have something like that? And then obviously you mentioned Eddie doing something here in Florida.
Well, Texas Boys Ranch was very important especially for me, because I was 7 years old and I loved to go fishing, but my father was superintendent of Texas Boys Ranch, and he put in an amateur wrestling program. And I was always trying to go fishing, and he would send the ranch kids after me and say, "Come on, you gotta come to wrestling practice." So, and that was my father said, "You got to do something." I had to do it. So I actually started wrestling as an amateur at the age of 7, and it carried on through high school. In high school, I was amateur wrestling through West Texas AAU and won that championship. And I was also football with West Texas, and we won the 1963 Sun Bowl in El Paso, Texas. And when I got back to Amarillo, there was a contract waiting for me to sign up with the Amarillo Territory for professional wrestling.
What was that?
Which I did, and there were some thoughts of pro football, but once I got started as a professional wrestler, there was no looking back, and there were some very good things about that day and time. Economically, $1 meant something. You could buy a Hershey bar for a nickel, and just a few days ago I tried to buy a Hershey bar and it was $1.50. So, when the guys were making close to $2,000 a week back in those days, that was the very first year I entered professional wrestling. Mickey Mantle's salary was $16,000 with the New York Yankees, and the wrestlers were right in competition with that, doing every bit as well.
Well, you mentioned football because you were a really good football player at West Texas State. You mentioned the Sun Bowl and getting a battle in that, which is a prestigious bowl. And you mentioned, I didn't know that you were entertaining looking into becoming a pro football player. Was the money, you mentioned about the money though, but the money was better in pro wrestling or comparable, and you just decided, no, I want to do this instead?
It was every bit comparable in professional wrestling. It was not better than the NFL, but it was right there along with them. And the opportunity was there for me as soon as I got off the airplane to go for it. And I went for it in professional wrestling. My father was my trainer, and I never looked back.
Were you a big Dallas Cowboys fan?
I've always been a big Dallas Cowboys fan. Especially Roger Staubach.
Oh, Roger the Dodger.
Yeah, I was a big Dallas Cowboys fan.
Yeah, so many great teams. I remember back in the day, the Steelers-Cowboys had huge rivalries with the Super Bowl and all.
Huge, yes.
Oh,